Hello, my name is Eric Fernandez, and I am the Title IX Coordinator. Today, we'll be talking about Title IX and completing your Title IX training. Pursuant to Title IX, we're required to give you this formal Title IX training. For those who are unaware, Title IX is a federal requirement that mandates that the school create a program that prohibits sexual assault, sexual violence, and any sexual misconduct. And so part of the requirements of Title IX is training as well. As a preliminary matter, the college has a zero tolerance policy with respect to sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual discrimination, and any of these sex-based offenses will be thoroughly investigated and dealt with accordingly. So we do encourage students that if you have been a victim or witness any sort of sex-based offense, to please report it. And you can report it to any school official, any instructor, and you can report it to me. That's my role as a Title IX coordinator, is to take in complaints and do a full investigation. So what constitutes sexual harassment? Under federal law, these are what constitutes sexual harassment: quid pro quo, unwelcome conduct, sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual exploitation. We'll briefly go through each one of these. The first one is quid pro quo. Quid pro quo basically means this for that, and it is a situation where someone is going to offer a benefit in exchange for sexual conduct. The second is unwelcome conduct. This is conduct of sexual nature that a reasonable person would determine is so severe and pervasive and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the educational institution's education program or activity. The thing to note with respect to unwelcome conduct is that it is based on a reasonable person's standard, and it must be severe and pervasive, which basically means just because you might feel offended by someone's conduct, it doesn't necessarily make it an unwelcome conduct. The objective reasonable person standard means if a person of the same or similar circumstance were in your situation, would they find that conduct offensive? The other note is that it has to be severe and pervasive, which means a one-time incident isn't severe and pervasive. It doesn't have to be continuous, but it has to be more than once, and it has to be on a somewhat regular basis. Sexual assault, this is any forcible or non-forcible sexual act directed against a person. This is the typical type of sexual harassment that we hear about, we're familiar with, is when it's a forcible or non-forcible act directed at an individual. Dating violence. With respect to dating violence, there are two key components. It requires the two individuals, the offender and the victim, to have been in a relationship. Whether a relationship exists is going to be based on the length of the relationship, the type of relationship, and their frequency of interaction. And again, this is going to be based on an objective, reasonable person perspective. Additionally, in order for it to be dating violence, it has to include a felony or misdemeanor crime of violence committed against the victim. The next type of sexual harassment is stalking, and this is engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety and suffer substantial emotional distress. And again, this is on the basis of sex. That is what's being threatened, essentially. There is a threat of harm, a fear that arises from a sex-based offense. Sexual exploitation occurs when a person takes advantage of another person for the benefit of anyone other than that person without that person's consent. Sexual exploitation may occur regardless of whether sexual activity takes place. A common example of sexual exploitation is posting something on social media about someone that is of sexual nature without their consent. That would be considered sexual exploitation. The key of all of these offensive conduct is the lack of consent. If there is consent, it cannot be considered sexual harassment. But the definition of consent is very important. Consent must be an unambiguous and willing participation or cooperation in act or attitude. It must be an affirmative, conscious, voluntary agreement. People who cannot give consent are those who are not conscious, those who are intoxicated, those who appear to be mentally or physically incapacitated, and minors cannot give consent. Expression of consent does not have to be verbal. Silence alone cannot be interpreted as consent. Additionally, prior sexual history does not presume consent either. Title IX in general applies to the education program or activity. It applies to on-campus premises and any off-campus premises that the college has substantial control over. It also applies to third parties. That basically means if, say, for example, a vending machine person that comes in that fills the vending machine, if they were to engage in any form of sexual harassment, Title IX would apply to them, and we would expect, or we would hope, that the victims would report that offensive conduct by a third party who is not associated with the college. But Title IX is very broad. It expands to not only students, employees, but also to third parties that come onto campus. Title IX also applies to activity within computer and internet networks. So a lot of you will be taking remote courses, and if you are taking remote courses, you can still be harassed or you can engage in harassing conduct through the internet. So if you witness it or a victim of some form of harassment, even while it's remote, we encourage you to report that. Making a report. Any person may report sex discrimination, including sexual harassment. The report can be done in person, by mail, by telephone, by email. The expectation is that it would be reported to me, but you may also report it to any of your instructors or any official at the college. We also accept anonymous complaints, but also note that if it's anonymous, it becomes harder to complete the investigation. So we do again encourage people to step forward and report witnessing any harassing conduct or if they've been a victim of harassing conduct. Who must report? So the following officials will provide privacy but not confidentiality. Basically, if a report is made, we will try to keep the information private, but if the report has to proceed to a formal complaint and investigation proceeding, then it's no longer confidential because we have to investigate and question and talk to witnesses. Identified campus security authorities are also required to report. All members of the college's community who are employees are also required to report. So if an employee or a campus safety authority witnesses anything, they have a duty to report. What happens after a report is made? Essentially, once a report is made, it will come to my attention and we will begin a formal investigation process. Campus works with a third party that provides individuals that do the investigation and that are part of the Title IX team. And so essentially what you need to know is that once a report is made, it's going to be investigated by me and a third party entity that specializes in Title IX investigation. If during the investigative process, we determine or I determine that that a formal complaint needs to be filed, this is the process of the complaint. The notice of allegation will go out it will be drafted by me and it will be sent to both parties, the alleged respondent and the victim. And then we begin the investigative phase. And after the investigative phase, a decision is going to be made, and the decision will determine whether it will proceed to a formal hearing. If it goes to a formal hearing, the hearing is treated just like any court proceeding. There will be an opportunity to be heard by both sides, an opportunity to present witnesses. All evidence will be considered. The rules of evidence concerning like hearsay won't apply. Everything is going to be considered. And then a final determination is going to be made, and the parties will both have an opportunity to appeal. Again, it's treated just like a formal court proceeding. Additional information. So a complete version of the college's Title IX policy is available online and also on the Moodle homepage. If you go to the Moodle homepage and you see the folder for Title IX, there's additional information there, additional resources, support services, my information as well, and the full disclosure regarding what the college's position is on Title IX sexual harassment and discrimination. And then additionally, this PowerPoint presentation should also be provided to you on Moodle as well. All right, well, that concludes the presentation. Thank you.